Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to enhance our pipeline so that it can process all of our files rather than just the taxi zone file. We want to do that without duplicating the activities or creating a pipeline for each of the file. Let's take a look at a potential solution. Pipelines also offer variables of type array. They can use that instead of the string variables that we used in the previous lesson. Within the array, we can hold all of the folder path and the corresponding stored procedure names for the 7 files. We can then use an activity called the forEach activity to iterate over the array and call the delete and the stored procedure activity for each iteration and also pass the folder path and the stored procedure name for each instance of the array with this one pipeline to process all of the files. Having said that, we are going to process all of the files except the trip data file in this pipeline. This is because trip data file follows a different logic due to the data being partitioned. Let's switch over to the Synapse Studio and get started with changing the pipeline. Here we are in our pipeline. The first thing we want to do is to create the variable with the type array and assign it with the value we want, which is the list of the path and this stored procedure names. So let me click on create the new variable. And I'm going to set that type to array, as we discussed. And now, we need the value and the value has to be an array object. I've already prepared that. So let me show you here. So as you can see here, it's an array object with the folder path and the USP name for each of the files. So we've got 6 of them here. As I said, we're not dealing with the trip data file here because that is slightly different to everything else. We'll deal with that later. But we've got the 6 here. So we've got the named objects for the and USP name for each one of them, and we just have to iterate over this. So let me copy this first and put it into the value. So the next thing we want to do is to iterate over this object and call the delete activity and the stored procedure activity for each of the iteration. So in order to do that, you can use an activity called forEach. So that is under the iteration and conditions conditional section. So let me bring that over. So we've got the forEach activity. I'm going to just name that properly. So that is going to be for each folder path, let's say. And let's go over to settings. And here you specify which items you're going to iterate over. So this is where the variable would go. So let me click on that, click on dynamic content, and then pick the variable name, which is the v_folder path, the USP name array. So it's now going to iterate over this array object venue, iterate over the array object. You want to do something so that there should be activities which are called for each statement set. To do that, you will have to add the activities here. So I'm going to add these 2 activities into that. So I'm going to select these 2 and then cut. And if I click on the forEach and click on the pencil here, that I'll put it on edit mode, and then I'm going to just paste it here. So now we've got the stored procedure activity and the delete activity here. So they're going to be called for each of the iteration. So let me link these 2 so that actually this stored procedure activity executes after the delete activity. And also in both of these activities, we like to refer to the array object rather than the variable itself we had previously, which is the string variable. So in order to do that, you click on delete activity, go to source, and the folder path is the one we want to change. So in order to do that, you come over, get rid of what's already there, and you click on the forEach iterator and it puts the add item in there. What that means is that it's picking up the current item within the array. So if it's the first iteration, it'll be the first item within the array itself, and you will have to get the named object from there, which is the folder path in our case. So let's click OK. And we have to make the same change here on the stored procedure. In order to do that, you come over to the settings tab and click here and get the what's already there, and now go to forEach iterator, that is add item. This time it's going to be USP name, so you might be wondering where that USP name is coming from. That is from the array here. So we've got the folder path as they folder path the object, and then the USP name is the USP name key. So they are the ones we want to pick. So let's click OK. And we've done all the changes we needed to do here. So if I go back to the pipeline in order to do that, you can click on the pipeline name here. So we are back in the pipeline now. So let's execute the pipeline. So let's click debug. And what we expect to see is that it's going to process all of the data, which means the 6 folders we want to process. So the pipeline execution has now completed. So let's start with the delete activity. As you can see, the delete taxi activity has succeeded for all of the files. So if I click on this, I'll see this once processed the calendar file folder and this one processed. The trip type and everything succeeded successfully for the stored procedure execution itself. We've got the taxi zone completed, but the others have failed. If I click on this button here, which is the error message, as you can see here, it says it could not find the stored procedure silver.usp silver calendar. If you remember, for the taxi zone, we created the stored procedure, but for the others we still haven't created it. So that's what we need to do. So if you go over to scripts and then NYC taxi got to LDW, and if I click on USP, we've got this stored procedure for the taxi zone, but we need to create the others as well. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to quickly clone these and create those and then come back and rerun this. I created the scripts to create the stored procedure for all of these tables now. So I've got the calendar here and let me execute that. And that's successfully completed, and I've got the trip type and the vendor, and we've got the rate code here as well as actually we've got the payment type. So they're all done. Apart from this, we've got taxi zone, which we've already created. So let me go back to my pipeline and rerun this, and hopefully this time it runs through without any failures. So that's now successfully completed. But I can see that actually I have left the taxi zone in the activity name. So let me quickly go and correct that as well, because it doesn't make meaningful sense when we are looking at the output logs. So let's say create silver tables or folders rather than taxi zone folder. So I'm just going to say silver folder. And similarly, I'm going to call this one as create silver table. So let me go back to the pipeline. I'm going to do one last run of this and we should get a successful result here. And then we can look at all the folders to make sure that actually they exist as well. So as you can see here, all of the deletes have happened as well as all of the create tables have happened as well. So let me go over to the data hub and they should be able to see all of the folders being refreshed. So we refreshed the taxi zone and the other also refreshed. So they should all have the same timestamp. So let me quickly refresh that. And as you can see, all of the timestamps have now been updated except for the trip data, which we haven't processed yet. We look at processing the trip data in the next session. But let me quickly go back to the pipeline and give you a quick summary of what we have done. So if I click on the variables, we've got the variable here, which is the array variable. We don't need these two anymore, so we can delete them. And this array variable has got the list of all the path and the table names that we want to process. The for each activity is going to take this variable, as you can see here, and it's going to go through the array, iterate over, and each of the iteration. It is going to call these two activities here, which are the delete activity and the stored procedure activity. And for each of the iterations, we are going to take the value of the folder path and send it to the data set here so that that data gets deleted. And similarly, we are going to take the stored procedure name and call the stored procedure activity here, and that is going to execute that stored procedure. So we've made all of it truly dynamic. So that means whenever you have a new table, all you have to do is come over here and update the variable to include that new folder path and the new table name. And it will work as you would expect it to be. I hope you have got a good understanding about how to create dynamic pipelines so that you don't have to duplicate your work and you can reuse your components like your datasets, activities, and things like that. So that's the end of the lesson. I'm going to quickly click on Publish to make sure all my changes have been updated in the repository, and that's the end of the session. I'll see you in the next one.